much, and very sunny good evening to all of you. It's an absolute pleasure to moderate this illustrious panel today. I don't want to waste any time talking anymore. Let's dive right into the discussion agenda. The panel objective is to talk about navigating the renewables agenda on three sides: policy, supply chain, and ultimately scale. To give you a little bit of context, today India is the fifth largest country in the world when it comes to installed solar capacity. We're trailing Germany by 3,450 megawatt, which if things go well, will displace them and be the fourth largest country in the world when it comes to solar. We are already the fourth largest country in the world when it comes to installed wind capacity, and we are only one of the 4 countries in the world whose total installed renewable capacity crossed 150 gigawatt as of December 2022. This is the context. When you look at the outlook, India aims to install 500 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2030, which means the amount of renewable energy addition we are going to witness in the next 7 years is more than the total capacity addition we have installed in the last 75 years. That is the scale with which India is growing. So keeping in view this growth, I want our panel today, and I hope we can get very, very interesting insights from them on how to navigate this crucial, ambitious, pragmatic, and a highly scalable agenda. Diving down to the discussion, I would like to start with Dr. Ajay Mathur. Thank you very much for being here. It's always a pleasure to have you. Maybe let me start by asking you, in the last 7 years, India's capacity increased by 17 times. Today, we are a ray of hope, both literally and figuratively, for a lot of countries when we talk about solar energy proliferation. What things that India did can be or worth emulating for the countries who are looking to rapidly decarbonize their sectors?
Thank you, Subbu. Thank you very much, Subbu. First of all, I want to thank you and ET for inviting me here. It's a delight, sir, to be here with you, with Mr. Asdan. To answer your question, Subbu, it's multifaceted. It's not one reason. The sharp drop in prices of renewables, both solar and wind, but particularly solar, helped tremendously. But this alone is not good enough. At the Solar Alliance, we looked at global investment that had occurred globally for solar and found that it's occurring in leaps and bounds. In 2022, it was $250 billion. This year, it's expected to exceed $350 billion. Yet, there are parts of the world, for example, Africa, where only 3 to 5% of the global investment is flowed. So we have done something right. What is it? I think the first issue, as has been discussed, is policies. The stability of policies makes a huge difference. The fact that they are announced by the leader of the country makes a difference. There are 2 policies which I believe are particularly important. The first was that we ensured that we found a price. So we moved away from allocations. We had already started moving away from allocations towards a bidding regime. So the first issue was the regime to find out the price. So there would be allocations and there would be bidding to choose who got that allocation. This greatly increases the comfort, it increases the transparency in the system. The second issue was not only did this happen, but at the same time, in the background, there was a huge amount of financing that also became available. You will remember that many years ago, this financing was in the form of grants. My colleagues from IREDA will remember that. There was actually a subsidy that was provided for projects which did renewable energy. That moved to low-cost loans. That has moved to regular loans now. And possibly in the future, we will move away to guarantees and possibly to private sector financing, which is built on those guarantees, till typically you have private sector financing alone doing it. Because of this growth of the private sector industry, it led to local production. The PLI incentives have helped. It has led to the creation of a huge amount of focused manpower, which has helped in the development and the deployment of this. And finally, it has led to by the utilities to accept renewable energy on a must-run basis. So the ISTS and so on have helped in all of this happening. But if you ask me, the two most important issues are, number one, the fact that this was placed on a high agenda, and number two, that financing was made available for it. So Subbu, it's a long answer to your short question.
So thank you very much, Dr. Mathur, and I think you made a very interesting point, and it makes my life easier to go to the next question, to the next panelist. Let me now switch to Mr. Bruno BOSLE from AFD. Dr. Mathur talked about financing and how financing was very instrumental in India's success journey so far. So how do you see, from an AFD perspective, the emerging role of DFIs in financing India's energy transition, or in general on a holistic view of a global energy transition?
Well, thank you for this very excellent question, and of course, thank you very much to ET for organizing this fantastic event and for having me. It's quite a very impressive panel because I'm close to Dr. Mathur, long-term partner from AFD, and also around me there is some of my clients plus very well-known stakeholders of the energy sector. So as a development partner, so AFD is the French public development banks. The question of funding is of course key, and if you ask me, of course, what is the role of DFIs, the first response, of course, is to provide more funding to the sector, which has been, of course, described by Dr. Mathur. So that's what we do, meaning in India, for instance, the AFD group that I represent has mobilized more than 4 billion toward climate change strategies, including renewable energy development in India. So that's, of course, something we are doing. But we are doing more than funding. What is important also is to contribute also in terms of knowledge. And in India, you have the chance, in fact, to have multiple very high-level research and institutions, as well as think tanks, which are very actively contributing to build, in fact, the long-term vision of the government of India, specifically as far as concerns the energy transition. So TERI, CW, several key institutions are contributing to that, plus, of course, key research and news organizations such as ET. So this is very important in terms of for building, in fact, this long-term vision, because nothing can be done in terms of investment without this long-term strategy, which is then implemented and defined by the national and central authorities. So we do that as well to support, of course, this long-term strategy and building knowledge and supporting strategies which help, in fact, to build this long-term strategy. But more than that, in terms of role of DFIs in India, what is also today important is not only to work separately or in silo, but really today what is important is to pool funding. So in India, in fact, you have all the major development partners which are working in India. Of course, the major multilaterals are implemented, World Bank, ADB. You have the major and the main one in terms of bilateral, JICA, Japan, Germany, France, that I represent. And of course, what is important is how we can work together, how we can, of course, channel the funding in the same directions for the authorities, for PSUs, and as well as for the private sector. And the last point maybe that I would like to mention, and which has been also flagged by Dr. Mathur, is if some years ago DFIs was maybe important to support and to provide flow in a new or nascent sector, which was renewable energy sector. Today, this sector is much more mature, and what is important, of course, is, for DFI to continue to provide affordable funding and other tools, but also, in fact, to create conditions for the private sector to come in. So leveraging funding is something which is really today on the table. This week specifically, you have several events, one organized in Paris with a new financing pact. What is behind this new financing pact is not only, of course, to increase the flow of public funding mobilized by multilateral and bilateral banks, but also, in fact, how to leverage on the private sector funding, which also shall flow more and more in this energy transition sector. So that's where also DFI has to play a role to play today.
Thank you very much for throwing some light on the role DFIs have played in India's journey so far, and I fully agree with you. Affordable and accessible finance is something that has been key, which even Dr. Mathur mentioned in his remarks. Maybe while we are on the subject of affordable and accessible financing, I would direct my question to Ms. Debjani Bhatia from IREDA. Ms. Bhatia, IREDA has been very instrumental in funding, co-financing a lot of RE projects in the country in its rich history. Solar and wind might be newcomers for you if I say that. So how do you see the role of this critical, accessible and affordable financing? How did it shape our journey so far, and how can it shape us to achieve our 500 gigawatt of target by 2030?
Good afternoon all. It's my honor and I feel privileged to be here and be a part of this August panelist. As we know that India has set a very ambitious target of 500 gigawatt of installation, and for that the fund requirement will be 21 lakhs of crores. And if we take 65% is coming from the debt financing, that means we are looking for something like 15 lakhs of crores. Now, as far as conventional financing is concerned, I think it is already proven that they are all bankable. Unless and until, very aggressive bidding has happened, and that has been done by the bidders itself, and there was some distortion in market for the solar sector per se. But otherwise, these are all bankable and technologically stable. The problem is with the emerging technologies, because lenders still view them as a riskier project. And therefore, the interest rate for this funding is a little higher. So, in my view, there are three points where we need to focus our attention. One is what type of products is there in the market for both conventional and for the emerging technologies. We at IREDA, when we have started our journey for financing renewable energy technologies, we started with balancing funding, because that time there was acceleration depreciation benefit. That was one of the fiscal benefit given by Government of India, because those technologies were still not viable. Then we shifted to structured financing, so non-recourse financing. But then we have understood that we are not covering the whole of the supply chain. And so we developed many other products like short-term loan for the developers, for the suppliers, and also for the contractors. We also developed schemes for guarantee schemes, so that the bidders can bid. And then we came up with discounting cash flow for many of the M&RE subsidy, be it capital subsidy or for the generation-based incentive. So this is the product designing. So going forward, for the emerging technologies, we have already started, making market-based technologies for the green hydrogen, for electrolyzers, and for the battery storage. which I think will, going forward, there will be major impetus for financing for all these sectors. Second important thing is the credit appraisal. Whenever there is emerging technology, what we do at IREDA, our technical team, they take training from the market leaders who are there in the technical front, be it in India or also mostly from abroad, because some of the technologies are developed there. And then whatever our learnings, we put it into our credit appraisal module so that we can map the risk according to their sensitivity. And we get to know what type of interest rate we should charge. And I think instead of charging very high interest rate, this type of model should be developed by all other FIs and banks as well. And third most important thing is, from where do we get 15 lakhs of crores of funding? So I think here is a challenge for us and also an opportunity. Because as far as India is concerned, we only have tapped 2% of the green bond market. And from IREDA, we have prepared a green taxonomy paper to see that, be it LIC or pension fund or EPFO, they should pledge 2% at least of their, their asset class for the renewable energy financing. Second is that, from the same thing, that I think for the commissioned capacity, we need to tap the AIF route and also through the InvIT route. And thirdly, for the emerging technologies, I think still there is a requirement of a concessional funding from the DFIs with a blending financing and also with some grant funding. With this, I think we are not very far away for the funding requirement for 500 gigawatt of RE capacity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bhatia. I think you have reignited the optimism in the room by giving us an overview of IREDA's plans and how you are approaching financing. Now let's shift the discussion to the industry. We have three eminent panelists representing the industry sector, and I would like to hear from them on how should we navigate. Maybe let me start with Mr. Ashish Khanna from Tata Power Renewables. Mr. Khanna, you are in a very special situation today when it comes to supply chain. You have seen India's growth in both manufacturing and the deployment, and you are definitely a part of India's growth, both manufacturing and deployment. So what do you think India has done right, and what should India do to address whatever vulnerabilities are left, if there are any, in our supply chain so that we are stronger enough to achieve our target?
So I think we have to do something like this, a collaboration, whether it is manufacturing or it is industries as such. We really need that when the baton is passed. One thing I will be very open about, even if you see when we look at the topic today, and not to be commenting on a person or individuals, navigation itself is that you are going to manage things. It's by word gives that there would be lots of issues which will come across and you have to sail through. When you have a target of 500 gigawatt, you don't navigate. It's a very audacious target. It is, like you said, we are at a one level and we are looking in next 7 years to do something which we have not achieved in the last 27. Possible, but then we should be conscious of the fact that till date we are on an average 12 to 15 gigawatt of renewable addition, all we say across in this world. Now when we are going to leapfrog from 15 to 50, and people like us who are there in all across the food chain, we have to look differently, whether it is policy or it is developer mentality or it is finances, and at the end of the day, who's the client? And will the same client be able to afford this 500 gigawatt? While we are an industry, there are still challenges at the level of sub 200 level, which we are there in it. Now increasing it means that we are increasing the risk or the degree of difficulties, or we are going to ease it down. Because at the end of the day, it's a business for many or for everyone who's a part of this industry. While Dr. Mathur mentioned about that we have gone into the bidding strategy, which brings transparency, I think we have also seen that when countries enhances their infrastructure beyond a certain level, they come out with a very different type of rule, which like to incentivize industry rather than industry taking each other pants off. Sorry for my language, but the bidding can happen. It's just that you are in it, and the tariff of 2 rupees, tariff of this, it just goes in your blood, and we have seen so many risks coming out on that part. I think it is important for us to start from a policy framework that we have to reach 500 gigawatt. How the government, industry, and when I'm speaking about an industry, it includes the developer, includes the contractor, it includes the supply chain. All of them are incentivized to achieve it. If I still have a policy which is very good, but a PPA which is restrictive to the developer the moment things changes, we will have a challenge. If I have a nice PPA and a policy, but the supply chain which is dwindling, and I don't have a manufacturing in this country, and there are import barriers from coming outside, I will again have a dwindling system. Somewhere or the else, the weak link will crack. So I think it is important for us to first address the weak link. Where is the weak link coming out in this interface? If I start from the bottom, today in the supply chain, we always say that we are doing very well. In fact, each one of us are doing very well and going for expansion. The challenge remains that for a 50 gigawatt, we don't have an infrastructure at least for next many years. And we are looking for 38 to 50 gigawatt from next year onwards. That's something we need to address. And we need to address it today, because every project will take at least 1 to 2 years for it to be built. And if I have hydros coming in, it is going to be even more. So I think from a policy standpoint, we need to be very conscious of this fact. If we have to basically give incentive for a B2B business, then my policy should be conducive for my B2B business. I cannot have a B2G regime for a B2B business. I cannot say that you are taking away my best of the clients, however I want you to grow. I should be transparent and honest in my purpose, what I'm trying to do out here. I need to incentivize B2B business. I should not be restricting them in any state. If there are two parties who are ready to do green business, they should be able to do it at the price they like and whatever mechanism they are finding for it. Currently, you don't have a policy framework for that too. You will have a challenge there too, if we have to indeed 500 gigawatt. On a manufacturing side, I think we have done enough. And let me not take away the fact that today we are the third country in this world. And if I look at Rajdan Saab when he was in the helm of affair, whatever we used to do in, it was less than 500, 200, 300 megawatt in a year. We are today doing the world third largest. The first is China, the second is US. We are the third on a per annum basis. With whatever we have in this country, we are achieving it. And I am very sure very soon we will take over US too on a per year expansion. Having said that, whether we will achieve 500 gigawatt, we should be very conscious of. Either we should be happy with what we are doing and we have taken an audacious target, then we should work towards it. Supply chain doesn't mean a module or a WTG. Supply chain means my port infrastructure. When I am looking for RTC, then if I am including my offshore business, it requires port infrastructure, it requires roads. We are talking about a 7 megawatt WTGs out there on a subsea level transmission line. I need my storage system, whether it is pump storage or it is my battery storage. I need to incentivize them and have that infrastructure built in today. So in my view, if you ask me, navigation will make us reach somewhere. But if we are really very serious about 500 gigawatt, we have the potential. We have all the wherewithal in this country. We have the people who has the enthusiasm. We have the businessmen who is ready to do it. We have a government who is giving a very high target. And there is all the paraphernalia which is there. However, this interfaces and the weak link need to be worked upon rather than we browbeating on those which we have succeeded. I think that's something which we have to work towards that can come out in open.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khanna, for being very candid. And I think I can take the liberty to rename the panel from navigating the agenda to accelerating the agenda so that we talk about switching the gears. But you made a very interesting observation. In fact, that is something that I wanted to ask other panelists. Maybe I'll go to Mr. Kushagra, Nandan from SunSource. I mean, it is without any doubt that we can see the market sort of evolving from a tender-driven, government-driven demand to a market-driven demand. The B2B part, the bilateral part, the merchant power part, open access, we see a lot of action in that particular sub-ecosystem of solar. How do you look at the trends and the outlook, and what kind of role does it play in us achieving our 500 gigawatt of target by 2030?
So thank you, Subbu. So first of all, thanks to ET and the eminent panelist here. So we actually focus only on commercial industrial side of the business and not go into the bidding wars, I think, which my Mr. Khanna was referring to, and for a lot of the reasons which were very well articulated. And in the commercial industrial focus, what we also know is, I think a lot of people may know that CNI is almost 50% of India's energy demand. So I think that's the sector with manufacturing coming more and more in the country. That's the sector which we also see is going to grow quite rapidly. And fact of the matter is that commercial industrial also ends up cross-subsidizing the residential and farming tariffs. So they end up in paying the highest tariff. So, and if you look at the Western economies where the commercial industrial tariffs actually are lower than the residential and farming tariffs because they want to boost the manufacturing. So from a manufacturing perspective, if we look at, if we have to make our Indian manufacturing more competitive, so the lower hanging fruits is if they keep on getting access to commercial industrial solar or RE, right? So they get better tariff and therefore the commercial industrial clients or the manufacturing becomes very, very competitive, right? And we have done one interesting project, not a very large client, 10 megawatt PPA, right, behind the meter. And the next year, the EBITDA increased almost on the balance sheet by 1.5% just by going solar. So without they putting any capital. So imagine the impact, what is happening, and they can be more competitive. They're all export-oriented industries. So as we start deploying larger projects with open access coming in now with green access rules getting notifying. So what we need is also a lot of policy push getting towards in states, right? So there are a lot of, we see there is a lot of political will. I think it's also trickling down, but there's still a lot of debottling of policies have to happen in a lot of the states, which needs to be very mindful of, there will be a challenge between commercial industrial clients buying from companies like us versus distribution companies, right? But distribution companies also have to take a very meaningful approach that eventually they should be looking us as their helping hand because ultimately they should earn from the revenues which they are getting from the T&D or wheeling charges, which we are providing these projects for. So, but bottom line is we see large demands coming in. In fact, right now what is happening is we are focused on multiple states in the country. The minute in our strategies, we develop interconnection and land, develop the common infrastructure, transmission line, substation, right? And then we go and start sitting down with the client so that we can give a confirmed timeline to them that by when we can complete the project. And what we are seeing is before we even start launching our project, once we develop the common infra, our plants are getting fully subscribed. So that's a momentum which is coming up in the industry. And but what we also see is there is definitely always supply chain challenges starts coming in, where to buy, when to buy, right? I think we are all part of that same group. So, but I think it's the right time to be in the industry, right time to be in the country. The growth is there, and we have to work on all the challenges what we have seen in front, be it the policy aspects, opening up the policy of the markets. I think, but it's there's a lot of work which is required to open up the policy floodgates. In multiple states, because there are only few states which are very open towards open access, right? And once the other states starts fully welcoming developers like us, it will actually boost a lot of manufacturing in the country, be it from panels, inverters, structures, right, all across the value chain. And therefore, it trickle down another level of employment generation which the country requires. So I think it's high time now. But we should also be very mindful that what has happened if you look at last 9 years, right, or last few years, a lot of growth has come in. But I think we are at a cusp where that I think we should be looking at the 10x type of a growth in next few years. I think we should be focused on those aspects.
I think the operative word is the supply chain here. And what I'm hearing from the industry is that while we have a very good ecosystem, we have a good policy, we have good infrastructure which is existing and upcoming, supply chain still remains to be the X factor. Maybe I would like to request Mr. Rajenthiran from Everrenew to give your insights on how do you look at supply chain issues and across the value chain, not just like Mr. Khanna said, not just from the developing point of view, but manufacturing point of view.
Right. So let me start with the previous question, right? Just my fellow panelists have already talked about policy, affordable financing, infrastructure, right? I think there are other key points, right? For example, inclusion, right? The retail customer, 10 years back, the retail customers were driving the renewable market. Now we don't find them, right? There is no space for the small and retail customers. So this is something which we need to look into. And how can we bring MSME into the loop? So that is also a very important point. Policy is there. There are a lot of policies, right? But the compliance to policy is also very important. For example, if you have very strict compliance to the RPO, I think 20-30% of the 500 megawatt target can be easily met. And the last one, which I think is very important, is there is alignment between the center and the state policy, right? It should not conflict with each other. If the center and state is aligned, then it becomes very easy for us. See, with regard to supply chain, I think whenever there is a demand, I think the industry will cope up to that, right? Today, if you actually, if you see turbine manufacturing, we have about 15 gigawatts of capacity. We can manufacture wind turbines, 15 gigawatts of wind turbines every year, right? But we install only 3. So first we need to understand why that is there. And even if you take solar, right? Solar, today I think India has a capacity to manufacture 23 gigawatts a year. And if you're talking about 40, 50, just we had to ramp it up, right? I don't think supply chain is a real challenge. It's only a policy, and if it's market moves towards it, I think all the other issues or challenges will be tackled.
Thank you for that. Now we move on to the final part of our discussion. We spoke about policy, we spoke about supply chain, but what lies ahead of us, like I mentioned in the beginning, is the scale. How are we going to achieve that scale? Maybe I'll again start with you, Dr. Mathur. Distributed renewable energy is very often underrated and overlooked. As a country which is essentially a subcontinent, how do you see we should scale DRE in the country? I know this is a global challenge, but from your experience, I want to know what should India do to get that thing right, especially when it comes to DRE.
Subbu, many years ago, when I was in the Bureau of Energy Efficiency and Mr. Razdan was Secretary Power, no, he was actually Secretary Energy Efficiency, he was also Secretary Power. He said a very interesting thing. I was, as usual, complaining to him about why things were not happening, and he said, Dekho, if you have to set up power plant, I have to talk and convince 5, 6, 10 people. But with energy efficiency, I have to convince a very large number of customers to move to energy efficient appliances. Appliances is what we were talking about. That, to me, is at the heart of the issue here as well. We have established processes through which the risks faced by large projects have been reduced. But the risks faced by very, very large number of small users, individually small users or small producers, have not been addressed. Let me give you an example. We are looking at greatly enhancing solar pumps in this country. However, the very negative impression in the minds of banks of agricultural borrowers has meant that this has really not taken off. But what has taken off? What has taken off is a program in Maharashtra, very much part of the Kusum program, where a comparatively larger, it's still a few hundred kilowatts, up to, I think, a megawatt, of solar capacity is built on the land which is owned by the substation. And they sell electricity to the electricity utility, the distribution company, for approximately 3 rupees a kilowatt hour. Now, for the Maharashtra State Electricity Distribution Company to supply electricity at that point from the grid, by their own admission to the Maharashtra Electricity Regulatory Commission, costs them 7.48 rupees per kilowatt hour. Imagine, there is a huge difference. Here you have a convergence of interests. There's a convergence of interests because the farmer needs electricity during the day. You're providing it to him during the day. The electricity company, the utility, has the maximum amount of losses in the supply of electricity to the agricultural sector. Well, here is one way of reducing that. So the Maharashtra State Electricity Distribution Company figured out that if all the electricity I sold to agricultural producers was solar energy at 3 rupees, I wouldn't be making a loss. My simple point is that we need business models. It is quite possible that tomorrow, when the prices of batteries falls, Kushagra will move from the commercial and industrial consumers who largely use electricity during the day, and therefore the amount of batteries that he installs are relatively low, to a point where he becomes a major supplier to homes. Because with batteries being cost effective, you will get solar electricity, which is cost effective. But as I said, it needs to have enabling regulations. I'll give you the example of UP. UP is one of the very few states where there are something of the order of 500 solar mini grids today, despite the fact that every house is connected to the grid. Yes, of course they are connected to the grid, but they don't get electricity 24 hours, hence they go in for solar mini grids. In this situation, the companies who are there use, the UP regulations are large, but essentially there are 3 important issues. The first is, if you want to set up a solar mini grid less than a certain size, I think 500 kilowatts, you don't need anybody's permission. Just go ahead and do it, and you can charge the consumers what they are able to pay, and obviously that payment should make it remunerable for you as well. And the third is, if the grid does come in and takes away your business, there is a formula for computing how you would be recompensed. That's it. Because of these companies have grown. They've grown so much that one of them has now got new equity investment by a Japanese company. It shows you that small DRE systems can function. They can be viable, provided we have the right business models. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for keeping it very, very, giving us an insight that has been lacking in the country when it comes to DRE, and innovative business models have been the reason why we are here, and unfortunately DREs have not picked up, and I think that is the need of the hour. Maybe expanding on that, I would now like to ask Mr. Bruno from AFD that do you see an evolution of innovative financing models plus business models to finance the transition story of India?
Well, innovation in the finance sector, what a tricky question. In fact, your first question is how we go at scale. From a young perspective, India is already quite at scale to a certain extent regarding your ambition. I see, in fact, maybe three points that I would like to share with you. The first one is ambition is great, long-term perspective and long-term vision is very important, and then the key point is what is the steps, in fact, to achieve this target. So, of course, defining how we progressively achieve this target is a key element. It's not very innovative, but without defining more in details how we can achieve, that's where, in fact, you foresee what is required in terms of infrastructure, what is required in terms of regulation, and that's where, of course, the Indian authorities have a role to play. The second point, I guess, which is important to flag is innovative funding, in fact, is really, in fact, to create a financial ecosystem where you have investors which are interested to reroute their funding to the energy transition. We talk a lot about green funding. Sometimes, in fact, behind this term, we only refer to energy efficiency investment or renewable energy investment. In fact, the energy transition is much broader than that, much broader than just purely renewable energy and energy efficiency investment. And one of the key factors is how, of course, we unlock, how we open, in fact, the investment, how we reroute the funding to investments which really contribute to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, how, of course, the investments which ensures that you mitigate the impact of climate change. So having said so, what is very important and what we see in India is, of course, the Indian green taxonomy, which is more and more developed and within more reinforced. That's very key to give confidence to investors to reroute the funding from classic investment to investment which make a change, which have some impact, which are channeled, in fact, with long-term investment, which definitely contribute to this 500 gigawatt target. So that's what is very important. And to do so, for instance, I can highlight one initiative, we are part of it with CIDB, with Shakti Foundation, with RBI, which is, of course, a platform where we are gathering all the financial sector stakeholders. We put in front of them European and key stakeholders which are facing the same concern regarding how we reroute the funding, and they share practices, they share tools, and the idea, of course, is to progressively reinforce the capacity of the financial sector to channel the funding where they are required for this 500 gigawatt target. My last point is, in fact, that you cannot rely only on domestic resources, and you cannot rely also only on the public sector. Public sector already flagged it, but domestic resources, I didn't flag it yet. Domestic resources in India are already channeled from the public side and private sector in multiple key priority sectors in terms of infrastructure, in terms of social sectors. And of course, to achieve this target, innovations require, in fact, to channel additional resources coming from abroad. And for this, and Ma'am flagged it before, green bonds is not something which looks, let's say, quite new or fancy, but in fact, issuing green bonds, which are in fact not only finding in national investor, but also find some tractions from international investor, is something which is key. Because in fact, and that of course is linked with the importance of having a proper Indian green taxonomy, to have of course the financial sectors which are of course eager and of course ready, in fact, to assess the different type of investment, have the capacities of course to go beyond what is green investment and beyond renewable energy and energy efficiency, and of course channeling funding from abroad, from of course the different financial stakeholders you have abroad, but also from different other types of investors which are very interested to benefit from this big push that we have in India right now. That's important. So that's what we are also keen to push on our side, not only to push the green bond issuance, but also to green bonds outside of India for channeling more funding to India.
Thank you very much for that. Dr. Mathur has an important meeting, so I would like to thank him. Huge round of applause for Dr. Mathur. Thank you very much for making it despite your busy schedule. So moving on to the financing part of the discussion, maybe I request Ms. Debjani from IREDA to answer this question that for scaling up of installations, of course, we need to scale up the financing. And we have understood that for scaling up installation, we need to scale up manufacturing. So how are you looking at financing manufacturing in India? I am aware that there have been some instances where IREDA has done it, and how important it is for IREDA that manufacturing also becomes part of your portfolio.
I think I need to keep it short. So, for the manufacturing, I'll just talk about the solar manufacturing per se. So, I think there is this push from government from both policy and fiscal incentive. So, we are the implementing agency for the PLI scheme 1, and that was having a corpus of 4,500 crores. And the second one, PLI 2, is implementing agency is SECI, and they have chosen 11 developers, and that has a corpus of 14,500 crores. So that is the fiscal incentive our government is giving. But as far as lenders are looking for the manufacturing, what are the challenges that a lender will face? I'll just narrate 5 of them. And then I will talk from the manufacturer side, that what they want from the lenders, and then I think there can be a convergence of both the things. So from the lenders, I think the first is that who is the technology provider for such technology, because as you know, neither polysilicon nor ingot has any plant in India. So we do not have any developer who will have an established track record. So we look very carefully who is their technology provider. Second is, what about the cost estimate for the technology chosen? Because you know, as a lender, we do not know how fast the technology is changing. When we start doing polysilicon, then we move to monopark, then now we are moving to TOPCon N-type, and then HJT. So, you know, for lenders who are not so much of technological savvy, I think there is a need of benchmarking of such technology and what type of capex, some benchmarking is required. Third is, you know, what is the offtake agreement? And the fourth one is the policy and the, because international also is, what are the norms in an international market? Because if we see that the projection is by 2026, we are going to have 65 gigawatt of both module and cell. And which will, that means that there will be an excess of half of the capacity. If that happens, then there will be a requirement of export. So we need to know about the international rules also. And the fifth is what about the OPEX, because that's very important. So that is from the lender's perspective, how we face the challenge. And from the market, I think what is the requirement that not only a project financing scheme, but there should be an equipment financing scheme. And in IREDA, we are actively considering that, because many of the equipment they will be importing from abroad. And I'm happy to share that we are very soon going to open an office in a gift city from where we can lend in dollar terms, and those manufacturers who will be exporting their product, they can always, take fund from that, and they can, because they will be earning in dollars, so they can save safely 350 to 400 BPS on the interest rate. And I think also there is a requirement of working capital financing, and that has to be seen very closely based on the OPEX. And if we can have a benchmark for all the technologies, what type of OPEX is required, that will help the bankers a long way. So with this, I'll just finish.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for giving a very comprehensive overview of how you plan to increase investments or increase lending in manufacturing. We are almost out of time and we have 3 more panelists. So maybe let me have a single question to all 3 of them, and I'll request you to keep it your intervention short. I'll start with Mr. Khanna and then Mr. Nandan and Mr. Rajenthiran. Uh, while we have to scale up both manufacturing and installations, what should we do, or what on the policy front, on the implementation front, and on the manufacturing front to achieve, accelerate, and finally reach the milestone? You can, I've given you 3 faceted questions, so feel free to answer whatever part you want to.
Well, I don't know, it's a 3-part question to be answered in sub 3 seconds. Let me just try to contextualize it. I think on the policy front, we need to understand why the business is not happening in the manner it has to happen. We have now more than 100 gigs, and there are successes, and then there are failures, and there are reasons for those failures. We just need to be very cognizant of those reasons for the failures and try to see that no businessman invests money to lose. So there must be reasons from the policy front too, which are not helping us. We all know those reasons, we just need to be conscious of them. On the front of your second question was on the supply chain. I think the fact remains that the lending community or the supply chain individuals, we have to appreciate the fact that the only thing which is static, which is also helping the industry, is the technology. Now, we have to invest in certain technology when we come to supply chain, and that technology is not the final product. Supply chain doesn't mean a module or a WTG and everything else is done. We are looking forward for a certain element and the inputs which goes into it. And unless all of that are within the country and at a scale. We are talking about a scale. Ma'am, let me tell you that the current capacity of manufacturing in China is 3 times the world can consume as on date. That's where is the capacity. And that's why where they are and where they were. They are not looking for that I will be 75% of my requirement. That's the state we are. Some of it goes off, but some of it keeps on coming. And they have invested a lot on those technologies too, on the innovation part too, and incrementally trying to do it. And that's why there are many companies which are successful. Some of them are not in that process. I think the third part which you mentioned about is the business has to run, whether it is B2B or B2G, when the receivables are coming on time. There is a predictability of return. Unlike the thermal or any other sources of power, there is nothing which changes once you have set the project. The only thing which changes is the cost of foreign exchange, the cost of debt, or sometimes the cyclones which comes, or the wind or the solar side. I'm not talking about RTC right now, which are the variabilities out there, which will remain as a variable. Considering this business as a fixed, predictable return without taking into consideration the risk part is not the right thing to do. I think in my view, we should be mature enough and conscious enough about the risk part, trust each other that some of them will be spectacular, somewhere we will face risk and we have to improve on it. Rather than pointing fingers at who went wrong and where it went wrong, I think it will help us in the next 7 years and times to come.
Thank you very much for that. Mr. Kushagra, from your perspective?
So I think from my perspective, it's number one remains policy. And as the states take more conscious steps in opening up, especially the open access side of the policy framework, it will help open up the industry more and more into those states. And we are only seeing currently only the few states are more active in opening up the policies, but we still see ups and downs. But I think from our perspective, I think the biggest barrier right now is opening up more states and therefore enabling the industry and enabling the clients, the end consumers more and more. Thank you.
Mr. Rajendran.
Yeah. So I will speak from the developer's perspective, okay? I can only speak from our company's experience, right? We started this company Everrenew 2.5 years back. Today we are into everything, right? We are into solar, we are into wind, we are into hybrid, we are working on floating solar, solar pumps, green hydrogen, and also offshore. So skills and resources is not a problem. We can quickly ramp it up. So as a developer, what we need from the government, right? The government has to ease the land permits and approval process, regulate the land prices, evacuation infrastructure, they have to match with the targets which they set for solar, wind or hybrid, and then a stable and supporting policy. That's it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for being very crisp and on the point. It has been a very interesting and insightful panel discussion. I really thoroughly enjoyed moderating. The underlying message and conclusion is that the game just started, picture abhi baki hai. We have 7 years to achieve our target. The optimism is at its peak, and maybe 4 years down the lane, we'll sit again and discuss where should we go. Thank you very much to all my fellow panelists, and thank you very much to ET Energy World for having us here.